He is the senator from Oklahoma. It is Markwayne Mullin joining us here on Will Cain Country. See, do you feel better about your score now that you know the guy you're interacting with is a bottom 2% intellect?
He reminds me of your professor in college that has a really tough scoring, and he gives no curve. So when I heard that you were at the bottom 2%, I was like, okay, I take that. That's like getting a C in a class that you want an A. But the guy that you think's
Yeah.
the star of the show gets an F. So you're like, hey, I actually feel better about myself now.
You were upset when it was like he's 68 percentile until you
Yeah,
found out I was two.
mid
Two.
mid level. I was like, okay, I'm mid level in height, and in some other areas, but not other. I mean, not majority of my life. But say I'm mid level and in IQ. I kind of was offended by that.
Well, I look at you with envy today. If only I could be mid-level. Joined here by Senator Markwayne Mullin. The big news of the day, Senator, is President Donald Trump has invoked the home rule law in Washington, D.C., deploying the National Guard to deal with crime. It was a little over a week ago that we saw a carjacking in Washington, D.C. We've seen the shooting on the streets outside of, I believe it was the Jewish Center in Washington, D.C. You've seen various crime pop up over your social media or television screens over the last several months. You know, it's interesting. I'm curious first. Let's just start this with, what do you think about this move from President Trump?
It's well needed because we got a mayor in DC that's not doing anything. I mean, I just want to run some numbers just so people would understand. In comparison, Washington, DC compared to Mexico City. Now, this is based on like per capita of 100K, right? So Washington, D.C. has 41 murders per 100,000 individuals. Mexico City, 8. Now, cartels running around Mexico City, we hear about murders, people being whacked because of their political affiliation in Mexico City. Lima, Peru, which I traveled a lot to Peru. I used to spend from 2000 to 2011. I spent a lot of time in Peru, and I always had to go in and out through Lima. I mean, the police literally stood in certain areas and said, no, 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 you can't go past this point. 7 per 100K. Once again, Washington, D.C., 41. Now, this is the United States Capitol where there's more police officers per civilians than any place literally in the world. It's 9 to 1. 9 to 1, you'll see federal or you'll see uniformed or undercover police officers 9 to 1 around Washington, D.C. And that's on the Capitol complex, right? And to still think you have that many murder rates. It used to be pushed out all the way to about 12th Street. Now it's all the way into 5th Street, and people are getting literally robbed right there in broad daylight. If you go through Washington D.C. and you drive, I'm not kidding, Will. It's like driving, and I've driven in probably 100 different countries. And it's like driving in a third world country. You got these mopeds flying past you. Nobody's enforcing traffic rules. People driving without license. You have homeless people that just walk out on the middle of the street. And it's absolute chaos. So for President Trump, who secured the border in 6 months, taking over Washington, D.C. to actually get control of Washington, D.C. and the police force, I cannot tell you how excited. In fact, I was texting back and forth with a cabinet member. I won't mention her name, but we were sitting there texting back and forth. She says, "When you come back in September, this place is going to look completely different, and I can't wait."
You know, it really chaps my hide that X is sitting here and has characterized me as a retard. And the stats rattled off by Senator Mullin, I know the stats that were showed today by the president came from the Will Cain show. They're up now in your studios here at Will Cain Country in Dallas, Texas. I know this because I got a text from the White House last week saying how incredible that was. The segment that I did last week, yes, that is from Will Cain show right there on your phone screen. And I know that the White House saw those stats as well. 41 homicides per 100,000 in Washington, D.C. Lagos, Nigeria, 15 per 100,000. As Senator Mullin said, Bogota, Mexico City, Nairobi, Havana, all safer when it comes to homicide rates than your nation's
Yeah,
capital.
but here's a question.
Pioneered, by the way,
Did
that
you
stat.
did you do the research on that, or did someone on your staff do the research? Because that might reflect the
That's
IQ
not.
level for your
That's
tweets.
not. X doesn't know that, and no one
Well,
watching knows that.
but your show
I have the
producer does.
staff, and it's true. The show account got a genius level IQ, so I have to. That's right. I'm Ron Burgundy. Welcome to San Diego. So here's the thing. I want to ask you this. Now, everybody on the left is freaking out about this today, Senator, and they're pointing out that crime in Washington, D.C. is not up, that it is down. Now, it is a fact, according to FBI stats, that over time, over a long arc of history, since the 1990s, crime is down across the country. We've had various peaks and valleys. We have had crime rise during the Biden administration. We had crime rise during the BLM movement. But over the long arc, it is down. And it appears, according to FBI stats, that it's even down in some short-term periods in Washington, D.C. Now, the question is that real and is it true? Are crime stats juked or are they realistic? I watched The Wire. Everyone's seen The Wire and seen how this becomes political, and they ask police departments to often play with crime stats. I think almost as valuable as those stats is a little bit of the anecdotal stuff that you told us about, what you see and you experience in Washington, D.C., and you're not alone. I mean, I've seen some other people posting this morning on X that you go around D.C., look, you don't feel safe, you smell the constant presence of weed, you just don't have the quality of life that reflects an improved crime situation in the nation's capital. So what am I supposed to make of these stats, then, coming from the FBI?
What I would say is look at what's being enforced and not being enforced. The FBI, for instance, I'll say this, they only deal with the most heinous crimes. I'll use Oklahoma, for example. They have over 5,000 pending cases, but they only deal with the most heinous crimes. Washington, D.C., if they're not reporting the crime, then they have no statistics of it. And there is absolutely no one enforcing traffic laws. And I'm just going to use traffic laws because traffic laws lead to a lot of arrest. It leads to suspects that are wanted being arrested. It leads to seizures of illegal weapons, seizures of illegal drugs. It leads to a lot of separate infractions. On Sunday, you're in Washington, D.C., and Sunday they have motorcycle gangs, not Hell's Angels, but kids, teenagers, and adults running around on four-wheelers and motorcycles going through the nation's capital, right by the mall, riding wheelies, and no one touches them. They literally blow right through stoplights, everything else. You talk about home invasions. They very seldom, unless it's a homicide involved, they very seldom even register it because they have the crime so high by the amount of dollars that have to be stolen, or the seizure or the severity of the crime to actually fit a felony. It's only considered a misdemeanor. Misdemeanors, they typically don't even write up the crime. I had my alarm go off at my house. Complete accident. It was a complete accident, but the alarm went off. And who responded wasn't police. It was the fire department. I went out there and talked to them, and I said, what did you guys respond and said the police? And they said, unless it's a panic button with a 911 emergency call, then police don't respond to it, just fire. So are they writing up the crime report if the house is invaded? So my point is that they may be able to point to that. But what it is, it's not being prosecuted. They've changed the laws in Washington, D.C. in a lot of liberal cities to where the crime is just not being prosecuted, which is why it's going, the crime rate is actually up, but the prosecutions are severely down. And the police department's like, we're not even going to respond. And I mean, we're literally not even going to respond. A carjacking happened right in front of my house. Right in front of my house, a carjacking took place. They came by and wanted to get my video surveillance of it. They didn't even write a report of it. I talked to the neighbor that got carjacked, but they actually didn't end up taking his vehicle. They said, well, since the vehicle wasn't taken, they just wanted to just leave it alone because they don't have time to investigate it. They didn't even write a report on it. They responded but didn't write a report. So those statistics mean nothing to me. If you want to know what Washington, D.C. is like, come with me. We'll walk around that place right at dusk. And then we'll do it again at 1 a.m, and you tell me how safe you feel.
Well, one of the things you just brought up is part that I actually want to focus on. And this was another graph and stat that we showed last week on the Will Cain Show, but that's juvenile offenders in crimes against persons. So this is according to the FBI, and this is a category that is up over time from 2020 to 2024. You can see on your screen if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook. And that was the case in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago when we talked about the carjacking that captured the nation's attention. We have a problem. We have a problem with kids, often mobs or gangs of kids committing crime, often violent crime, Senator. And one of the things that Judge Jeanine Pirro at the press conference this morning with the president talked about is beginning to treat 14-year-olds as adults, charging 14-year-olds as adults. Now, I don't know. I literally do not know, Senator, if that is the right course of action. I mean, I have a 14-year-old and I can speak. He is not an adult. He certainly doesn't have a fully formed mind. I also know the price that you pay in sending a kid around to prison at that age, that his life is probably going to be one that is not rehabilitated, but one of crime going forward. So I'm a little torn on whether or not 14-year-olds should be treated as adults. I do submit they are committing adult crimes. They must be punished. I don't know if that serves as a deterrent, but I think ultimately, if we're going to solve kids, you can't do it unless you solve families. And what you're really talking about a problem here is how do we solve the toughest problem in our society? What do you do with broken families? What do you do with bad parents?
Well, so I'm going to dive in on this one, Will. This is something before I got into Congress. When I was serving in the House, my wife and I worked with the youth for 13 years. In the county we lived in, I was on the youth sanction board where we dealt with juveniles. I had my jujitsu gym. I actually had a deal worked out with the court to where they could have a second chance if they came in and worked with me and worked with my team, learning self-defense, not learning discipline. In fact, we had 4 keys to success, and I still preach it to my kids: honesty, hard work, respectful, and responsible. And what we would do is try to grow kids, because the number one issue, and 99.9% of the time, it was the parent that was actually feeding into the kids. It wasn't the kid that just decided to go rogue. Now, it did happen very rarely. You would have a kid that just was a bad apple, but most time it was the parents, and you would find a very dysfunctional family, and typically the dad was absent. And the mom wanted to be a friend, or the dad wanted to be a friend and not a parent, didn't want to be disciplined. And when I'd do home visits. And when I'd go to home visits, I'd spend more time working with the parent than I ever did with the kid. And it was disheartening. And at some point, I had to walk away, because if you can't fix the kid or the parent, you probably aren't going to fix the kid unless the kid actually wants to change. But that's absolutely correct. However, the crime has to be able to fit the punishment has to be able to fit the crime. And you have juveniles now that know they can get away with it because they're going to be charged as a juvenile, especially in very liberal cities. You have some judges that, crack down on them, but those are the ones that go viral. But you have, for every one that goes viral, you have 10,000 that doesn't, that gets a slap on the wrist and they get away with it. I mean, you saw a video going around right now on social media, on Instagram, where they have these 3 young kids, probably all underneath the age of 10, that walked into a CVS and was just walking out with bags of stuff, and they were in their pajamas. Well, who sent them in there to get this stuff? Their parents sent them in there to get the stuff. It breaks my heart, but they still have to have some type of punishment too. And so I don't know if there's a perfect solution. I think you have to deal with it base on base, and the judges had to be able to do their job, and the police had to be able to do their job, and you got to leave it up to the case to do it, because just setting at 14 isn't going to work. There is some 14-year-olds that are highly, highly mature, and because of their life experiences that they grew up in, and then you have some 14-year-olds that aren't. And so I don't think you can just set it at 14. I think you have to do it with juvenile cases. You have to do it case by case.
If you're in government, in which you are, and you're at the state or federal level, it truly is, I think, the most intransigent, unsolvable problem of society of what do you do to replace the integral role of a family. And the answer, sadly, probably is I don't want to be defeatist, but there's nothing that you can do. You know, my wife has a lot of exposure here in the state of Texas to the foster care system and just how bad that situation is for most of those kids. Not all, there are some real angels out there, right? But once the family breaks down, the state has a really hard time stepping in to fill in that gap. It just doesn't have a good way. We should. Like, how do you fix foster care? How do you fix adoption? How do you fix juvenile crime? And I just don't know that those problems can ever be solved if you can't solve the family. And I don't know that society can fix a family.
Society can't.
That's a culture issue.
So let me. I didn't know your wife was involved in foster care. Obviously, Christy and I are, because we're in the heavy into adoption, and that leads to being involved in foster care too. And the truth is, you can take a kid that is literally living in filth. Their parents are drug addicts, and leave them alone all the time, and leave them go hungry, and maybe they've even been in very abusive situations. And you can put them in a clean, nice, safe home. And not all foster care parents are the same, but I'm just saying you can. And you give that child a choice, which one they want to live with, and within a month they want to go back home. It's just the draw of being with their mom or being with their dad, and I can get that. I understand that. And in society, you cannot regulate morality. You can't make laws for that. The only thing that can fix those homes is the Lord Jesus Christ. That's the only way that gets fixed. You got to bring something more into that family that wants them to be a parent, that wants to understand they want to raise a child, that wants them to want to better themselves, that gets out of blaming society for the situation they're in, but be able to take responsibility for themselves and have hope beyond themselves. And the only way you can do that is you got to put something, a higher power in their life. And that's where with Christy and I, yes, I worked for the juvenile in the county. We also did tough love every Friday night. But then if it was the right time, I would invite these kids to a youth group that we were part of at the Assemblies of God in Quita. And hey, let me tell you, not all of it worked out right, but we were planting a seed, trying to, if we can't get the parents' attention, we wanted to plant a seed in the child themselves. And that's the only thing that can fix it. You can't fix it any other way, Will. And you know this, and your wife sees it. And it's the most disheartening thing that you deal with when you're dealing with children like this. However, you have to punish these kids. They have to be held responsible for their actions regardless of it. And because the crime rate is rising, and the crime rate on all this stuff in serious crimes are a lot of them being committed, especially in Washington, D.C., by juveniles.
All right, Senator Markwayne Mullin, I want to hit a few other topics with him here today, including that it is expected this Friday President Trump will meet with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, in Alaska. I think there's a certain level of skepticism that is earned about the progress that could come out of this meeting. Putin has been very, very reluctant to move in any direction that could push Ukraine and Russia toward peace. But at this point, Senator, we're looking at Azerbaijan and Armenia, India and Pakistan, Congo and Rwanda. Peace deals struck in the first 6 months of his presidency all across the world, so much so that many, I think rightfully, have brought up the Nobel Peace Prize. It seems like that would be a layup if he was able to accomplish that as well with Russia and Ukraine.
You know, I think so, but it's much more complicated. Now, I compare this to Reagan, Gorbachev. Everybody criticized Reagan for meeting with Gorbachev, and what ended up happening is the collapse of USSR and the end of the Cold War, and a relationship that was built again off of the economy, because our economies were tied together, so economic incentives. And what you're seeing right now is Russia's economy is tanking. They're tired of subsidizing China and India. And what I mean by that is they're selling oil to Russia, or Russia's selling oil to India at $76 per hundred, based on, or $76 or 76 cents on the dollar, whichever one you want to look at it. And India's turned around and selling it. They're profiting. China is buying it and hoarding it. They're tired of subsidizing their economy while their economy is failing because you see China and India economies growing. At the same time, they also understand that if we put sanctions, heavy sanctions on India, which we did, and heavy sanctions on China, it starts boxing in their economy. So Putin at this point is looking for an exit. Now, what he's proposing isn't practical. It's just not. It's not practical. I have been in meetings with Witkoff, with Lindsey Graham, with myself, and a few other individuals discussing with some lower level individuals from the Russian political world, trying to figure out a path forward. What Trump has is one, he doesn't bluff. And they know that going all the way back to 2017 when he took over the airspace in Syria after he warned them, if you allow Assad at the time to use chemical weapons on his people, that we will take over the airspace. He did it the first time they did it, and not only did that, but he destroyed the airport and all the aircraft that Russia had parked in 30 minutes after they did it. And then the second time, he also knows that when he gave Iran 60 days, at 12:01 on the 61st day, bombs started raining in. That's not lost on Putin. Putin, it may not want an exit strategy, but he's going to need it. Remember, he's the one that wanted the meeting. By Trump meeting him, I believe there could be more positive out of it. Now, it doesn't make any difference what Trump does, whatever deal he gets. The left is going to criticize it. What Trump has always wanted, what President Trump has wanted from the beginning, is to stop the killing. And he doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants a peace deal. And I will tell you, I can't get into the details, but some of the stuff, like I said, that Russia is offering just isn't realistic. It's not realistic. Zelensky's kind of in a position too that he needs to end it too. The idea that the lines are going to be redrawn where they were probably isn't realistic. That's probably not going to happen. But can the war end? Yes. As long as Putin wants to end it, it can be ended, and Trump can help negotiate the end to it. I believe he does. I believe he's looking out to it, or looking for an exit strategy right now. And the only person that can end this thing is the guy who wrote the book on the art of the deal, and that's President Trump.
We'll see. It's going to be a tough deal. Neither side wants to give in from where they are or where they were before this war. All right, before we lose Senator Mullin, I want to talk to you about a couple of things you're working on. First of all, the nomination approval process for cabinet members. I know that's something that you want to bring reform to. Talk to me about this. I know you were integral in many different cabinet members, notably Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. What do you want to change about the process?
Well, there's several things that have to be changed in this. And keep in mind, I was on Brian Kilmeade last night, and Brian Kilmeade said, the Republicans are going to use a nuclear option. We are not using a nuclear option. Chuck Schumer used a nuclear option when he chose to filibuster every one of the nominees except Marco Rubio. That's never happened ever in any presidential history, ever. Keep in mind, Obama and both Bushes got 98% of their people in place by unanimous consent or voice vote. Not one has went through unanimous consent or voice vote with President Trump. So they're slowing down purposely, trying to disrupt President Trump's presidency by not allowing him to put his people in place. So what we have to do is change those rules. Harry Reid's the first one that changed the rules. It went from they have to have 60 on a rule change, dropping it down to a simple majority of 51. So Harry Reid started this. What Republicans are going to do now, is, okay, you've done this, so there's three options. This is the way it works right now. Right now, we have to have a vote on going in and out of legislative to executive session on every nominee. So that's one vote. We automatically go to into legislative session. To go into executive session, which is where you got to have for the nominees, we got to have one vote for there. Then you got to have another vote to invoke cloture. Then you got to have another vote to end cloture, and then you got to have one vote to nominate the individual. So those four votes take a minimum of 30 minutes each. Then you have a 2-hour debate. So you have a minimum of 4 hours, which you can't vote in 30 minutes anyways, because senators walk slower than molasses pours on a cold day. So but that's the minimum that it'll take. When you get done with that, it's about 5 hours per individual. What we're looking at is saying, okay, one, let's stay in executive session. Rather than having to go back and forth, let's just stay in executive session all day. Two, limit the debate from 2 hours to maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then we're also have talked about, well, why would we even need debate? Because not one single person's vote has changed because of the debate. Why don't we just go straight from the floor, straight from the committee, straight to the floor, and have an up or down vote on it? That's probably going to be harder to change because there's some old rule dogs that's in the Senate, that's even in the Republican Senate, that want to keep that debate time there. So we'll just limit the amount of time. And then the other one is if they come out of committee with bipartisan support. There's 66 of the 180 plus nominees we have that's waiting. There's 66 as bipartisan. If they come out bipartisan out of the committee, then they could move straight to the floor without having debate and go straight for an up or down vote. And then the last thing is trying to do them in groups. So you have a group of ambassadors. So they'd all have to be part of DOJ, part of DOD, part of the ambassador corps or whatever, or DOI, or DOI or DOE, whatever it is, and group those individuals that are less controversial together, and vote on them in blocks of 5 or 10. So there's a lot of options. We're working through this, Will, right now. In fact, the people who are leading this is Eric Schmidt, Katie Britt, James Lankford, and I shouldn't have started naming them because there's 2 more that's leading it, and they're keeping all of us informed. We're all have input on it, and I think we're going to present this the week of the 3rd, and I'd be real surprised if we actually don't have a rule change by the end of that week.
Well, this inside Washington baseball is always hard for the common man to kind of understand, from even terms like cloture into the amount of time that you just laid out for us to get somebody approved. I do know that you're taking people behind the scenes. I do know that on your social media, it's almost like a play-by-play behind the scenes on the process that you're guiding people along, and they can find that at your social media feeds, Senator?
Right. Yes, and you can follow us. We do weekly and a lot of times daily updates, especially when we're DC daily updates, and it's SEN Mullin. So it's at SEN. I hate that, but that's abbreviation. At SEN Mullin, and that's on across all social media platforms.
All right. He's going to take you behind the scenes. You can see the process. All right, Senator Markwayne Mullin, certified mid-level intellect. Always fun to have here on Will Cain Country.
Thanks, brother. Senator. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.